So you've had an emergency at your house or your business. You've had a water main break, a water line break. Somebody left a tap running. You were away for a while. You've had overland flooding. Something's happened. You had a sewer backup. And now you have wet photos. What do you do to fix photos that are wet? Well, today we're going to talk about damp, which is different than being wet. Who am I? My name is Mike Patterson, and I'm a professional full-time photographer located here in Southern Alberta, Canada. I've been a photographer for over 38 years. I also run a full-service photo lab, and I've dealt with thousands or tens of thousands of fire, flood, water, mold-damaged photos. And I'm going to tell you what you can do to stop the damage and to repair the damage. So let's get into it. Now, I warn everybody in these videos, I'm doing a whole series of them. I'm talking about smoke damage, fire damage, flood, today dampness, not actual water, and we're going to talk about mold. But I warn everybody, everything is different. Every situation is different. So use your head when you're dealing with it and take this information and apply to your situation. The other thing, when I talk about taking them to somebody, I'm not taking them to a department store or a discount store. I'm telling you to take them to somewhere that is educated, somewhere that you can talk to the person who's doing the work, not somewhere where it's going to go through this person, that person, the other person. You want to find somebody that is qualified to look after it, and that can be the hardest thing. Now, if you're in Southern Alberta, great, bring the stuff to me. I'd be happy to help you. If you're not in Southern Alberta, that's going to be a problem finding somebody. So let's get into the damp photos. Now, with damp photos, it's sort of like grading them. What's damp and what's wet? Anything is damp up until there's actual water on the photo. That's how I look at it. Or water on the artwork. Or water on the negatives or the slides. If it's just damp, but there's no actual running water, there's a lot of things you can do to stop the damage, to prevent additional damage that you can't do with a wet photo. So first of all, damp. Remove the pictures from the dampness. Now, I'm not saying remove the pictures from boxes and frames. Don't do that. But I mean get it out of the place that is wet. Perfect example. Had somebody come to me a number of years ago. Their basement had flooded. They were gone away. They came back home. The basement was flooded big time. We're talking there was feet of water on the floor. Well, downstairs on the walls was a bunch of very historically significant to their family photos. They had been in that dampness for the whole time that it had happened. When they got there, they were able to get downstairs with the help of the restoration company that was doing the work, with the help of the company that was cleaning up the mess, and they were able to get down there and get the pictures off the walls and take them out of the house. Right then and there, they had stopped a lot of damage from happening and getting water splashed on them, getting them knocked into the water, so on and so forth. They got them out of there. Now, at this point, you're going to have to consider how wet they are. If they're just slightly damp and you can touch them, or you're feeling them, or you're feeling the wood, and there's just a little bit of wetness to them, take them somewhere dry and let them slowly dry out. Just let them dry out. Don't put them in a dryer. Don't get a hair dryer. I've seen that stupid suggestion. Don't get a heat gun. Just let them dry out. The difference between being slightly damp or really damp to dry is usually not a lot. We're not talking the paper is soggy. We're not talking the paper's falling apart. We're talking they're just damp. Now that's if it's a photo. That's if it's artwork. That's if it's negatives or slides. But that's not if it's behind glass. If it's behind glass, or if it's in albums behind plastic, this is a big area that you're going to have to figure out where you can go. If you know it's just slightly damp, you can try taking it out of the frame yourself or out of the album yourself, but be extremely careful. If you start lifting anything and it starts separating, stop. I and many other people will be able to digitize those photos through the glass and through the plastic. And if they're not damaged, it's easier to just digitize them and print them than it is to damage them, digitize them, restore them, print them. So if you can get them out, if you can get them off of the stuff, do it. If they're starting to fall apart, if they're starting to separate, stop and don't go any further. Now, here's the problem. If you don't do it relatively quickly, When it does start to dry out, they will stick to the glass, they will stick to the plastic, they will stick to whatever it is that they're touching. One of the biggest problems with damp photos is when people have them in shoe boxes or people have them in albums that are pushed together really tightly, and then they start drying out. Then a week later, a month later, a year later, they bring them to me and it is a large block, and you can't separate them because that dampness has stuck them together. So if you can do anything to get them apart by going very slowly and separating them, your best thing to do is take some white towels or white sheets and lay them so that the pictures are up, so that the back of the photo, the paper back of the photo, is touching the towel. Don't put them in the sun, don't put them in the dryer, don't put them in any heat, just lay them on the towel and let them dry. They are probably going to curl. Sorry. Honestly, there's really nothing at this point you can do to keep them flat while they're drying. But as they curl, don't try to straighten them, because guess what? As you try to straighten them, they break. As you try to straighten them, you damage them. As you try to straighten them, just let them dry. Just let the damage stop where it's at from the dampness point of view, and let them curl if they curl a little bit. Now, if it's artwork, and I've talked about this before, artwork and original documents are probably the hardest because there's no people out there that can restore them easily. It's a very labor-intensive and expensive procedure. But if you can take the photo, the artwork, the document, or whatever, get it out of the frame. If there is glass, get it away from the glass and let it dry out. A lot of times the document will stop any fading, anything like that at that point. It's not going to be perfect. You're still going to have somebody look at it in the future, but at least it's away from the stuff it's sticking to. If it's artwork that hasn't got glass on it, just take it out from the moisture and just let it dry out. Take it to somebody local, if there is somebody local that does art restoration or reframing or whatever, see what they will say with it. But originals are the hardest. If it's a document that you just want digitized or recopied so that the damage is restored or stopped, or photos or slides or negatives, just let it start drying out. Now, negatives are one of the big ones. If a negative is damp and you keep them in those sleeves, when it dries out, they're going to stick to it. You're going to start getting the logo of the company on it. It's going to be a mess. But if you take those negatives out and lay them on any type of a towel or anything like that that has lint and stuff on it, when they dry out, that's going to get stuck to that. So for negatives and for slides, negatives are the worst. Lay them so the curl is like this. You'll notice that negatives curl, and lay it so the least amount is touching, and put them on something that is like plastic or arborite or something that has no lint, no dust, nothing for it to stick to, and let them dry from there. Now, I've heard people say, well, rush them to somebody. Well, guess what? A lot of times rushing it to them means a week or 2 weeks later. So you're best to do something like this immediately. Even restoration companies, they come out 3-4 days later. If you can start the drying process already, start it. Lay your slides down. Let them start drying out. We're talking damp. We're not talking wet. Let them dry out. Let them start to dry out. It may be that they were just a little bit wet, and once they dry out, they're fine. But I would strongly suggest if you get any damage whatsoever, you at least get them digitized and either have the digital file or have prints from it, because you just don't know how wet they got, and you don't know if mold or mildew is going to start. Usually if you let it dry out completely, you'll have no problem with mold and mildew. That only happens usually if they stay wet for a long time. So just be careful with that. So just watch it from there. Now, in the next video, I'm going to talk about what happens when they're really wet. But I'm going to add in a couple things here of what definitely not to do. Whether they're damp or whether they're really wet, this is going to apply to both. 1, don't put them in a dryer. Don't use a hairdryer. Don't use a heat gun. Do not put them in the freezer. I get so many people bringing me in lumps of frozen whatever, negatives, prints, slides, and they were only a little damp. Don't throw the damp stuff, because it's harder to freeze it, thaw it out, and then dry it as it is just for you to dry it at home. Do not spray any chemicals on it. Do not use compressed air to dry the stuff out. Just let it dry naturally. Be very careful. And the big thing, and this is what I wanted to include because I'm going to talk next time about water. I've actually heard people say if you have wet pictures, if if you have wet negatives, if you have wet this, that, and the other thing, that you should put them in water and freeze them in a block. Don't make the situation worse. Let them dry naturally. The other thing is, don't use rice. Rice works great for electronics, but you don't want to pack pictures in rice because guess what? It'll stick to them while it's drying. So don't use rice. Just let it dry naturally. Don't put it in the sunshine. Let it dry in the house. Just let it dry slowly. So until next time, have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.